Um, Hello, everyone. My name's Marcos. I work, there you go, at DuckDuckGo. I'm an Android engineer there. If you're into Twitter and that kind of thing, that's my handle. Just really, really happy to be here finally in an actual conference, face-to-face, meeting people. It's been a long time. Don't know if you remember back in DroidCon London 2019. A lot of things have happened since then, like coronavirus, obviously, remote work that now seems to be a thing. Also, getting into some more serious stuff, we also saw the CEOs of Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon testify before the US Congress in a historic antitrust hearing. Exactly a year ago, Google was sued by the Department of Justice over monopoly power abuses over search. Literally just last month, the US antitrust officials also started to prepare a second monopoly lawsuit against Google, but this time over the company's digital advertising business. If you know Uncle Bob, he's still Uncle Bob. Nothing has changed there. Women are still being discriminated at work, especially black women, by the way. The Black Lives Matter movement had also had a massive impact these last few years and kept exposing systemic racism, which, by the way, we're also responsible for in some cases, like what you can see here. Apparently, you're not entitled to your own name. We're still hiding behind all racist conventions just because it has always been like that, right? Coding bootcamps are still overcharging a stupid amount of money to people trying to get into tech and basically failing at teaching basic concepts. Also, in this dark timeline, at least Facebook brought some humor to the table by taking the European Union to court over a privacy dispute. Also, Facebook bought Giphy, and with that, more of your personal data. And if you want to know how, then you should know that Giphy can actually track each keystroke that is searched. Also, in May of last year, there's a lot about Facebook here, let me tell you that. Facebook SDK crashed tons of iOS apps including Spotify, TikTok, Pinterest, Tinder, Google, SoundCloud, and so many more. And do you want to know the best part about the whole thing? Is that they actually had hidden code that will just run by including the SDK. So what people was trying to fix that is just commenting out all the calls to the SDK. And that did basically absolutely nothing. Not even 3 months later, again, another Facebook SDK issue had a lot of apps crashing yet again. And more recently, you probably have heard about this, but Frances Haugen released a bunch of internal documents that basically show that Facebook is lying about making progress against hate, violence, and misinformation. So, not surprising, they basically just put in profit before public good. And I'm not surprised about that. I'm sure you probably are not. And I would really love to have time to talk about what happened this year at Basecamp, where, you know, a third of the company left after no longer being allowed to openly share their societal and political discussions at work. But unfortunately, we don't really have a lot of time. So instead, let's just try to focus on 3 different areas here: ethics, privacy, and our community. Let's begin with ethics. I guess you're probably familiar with this, Mark Zuckerberg's motto, you know, move fast, break things. However, believe it or not, programming is actually a profession, right? What we do on a daily basis has a very big impact in people's lives. There is this thing in engineering called factor safety, which basically expresses how much stronger a system is than it needs to be for any intended load. Yield stress is how much the design part will be able to withstand. Working stress is how much that part is required to be able to withstand. So factor of safety of 1 means that the system will support the design load and no more. Factor of safety of 2 will support double the design load. For example, a loader like the one that you can see there has a factor of safety against tipping between 2.5 and 3.5. Any bolt, usually around 8. Any structural steel work is between 5 and 7. I'm very, very much into aviation. I actually loved the talk yesterday. Lessons learned with aviation accidents. And here you can see 3 levers between the 2 yokes. You got the throttle, you got the propeller, you got the mixture. I don't know if you can actually see that, but they're all different in shape. One of the reasons is that if you're flying at night and you lose all the lights, you can actually just quickly identify them. Also, they follow the same order in every single aircraft, so by default, you just know where they are and what they do. And the reality is that actual engineering cannot afford moving fast or break things, and neither should we, because what we do, and when we move fast and we break things, things like this can happen. Today, in sharing economy struggles, our app-powered car rental lost cell service on the side of a mountain in rural California, and now I live here. Which I thought is kind of funny, but then when you really think about this, like, which kind of experience are your apps giving to your users when you don't have any internet signal? Have you even tested what happens? 6 hours later, and after 2 tow trucks and 20 calls to customer service, blah, 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 the whole thing was just basically a software issue, and the car just needed to be rebooted. And this is just crazy, but it basically tells you that, yes, what we do as software developers has a real impact on people's lives. Following this whole aviation thing, you probably remember this thing. Boeing finds new software flaw on grounded 737 MAX jet. 346 people died. Main culprit here, in a nutshell, very, very quickly explaining this, something called the maneuvering characteristic augmentation system, MCAS. What it does is that it pushes the nose of the plane down when it thinks that the angle of attack is going to exceed its limit, so it's going to avoid the plane from stalling and then just basically falling to the ground. And there were a few issues here, but the main thing is that the implementation of the MCAS denied the pilots to override the system. So if the angle of attack sensor failed, then MCAS will just kick in, start push the nose down, while the pilots just try to desperately pull the nose up back again. And again, this is software that we're talking about. And do you know what our factor of safety is? Test. But we don't have time to write tests, right? Because we got to move fast. We have deadlines. We have product owners, clients. We have a lot of things there and we still need to deliver by a certain date. And you know that this whole idea around move fast and break things is basically just to release an MVP. It's this whole startup philosophy, really. We heard about that yesterday during the keynote. That's how this whole thing worked with Android, right? Android was supposed to be like a camera operating system. It didn't work. They pivot towards phones. Then they had to pivot again towards touchscreens, right? And that's the whole idea, right? Because at that point, what's really important is time. You don't need perfect, clean code. But the problem is that we have just taken that whole move fast, break things motto kind of approach and just made it the norm, right? Code for days, sometimes without sleep, compete against your peers and see who can ship more features and don't care about the quality that much because we have to move fast. And it's not even surprising that in places like Silicon Valley, programmers have started taking Adderall and microdosing magic mushrooms just to keep up with this frantic pace. Luckily, this is all coming to an end. In a report from Everyone, more than a quarter of over 1,000 tech workers surveyed in the UK said that they have seen decisions made about a technology that they felt could have negative consequences for people or society. They also highlighted failures in safety and security and inadequate testing before product releases. Nearly 2/3 would like more time and resources to think about the impacts of their products. Which, to be honest, is not really surprising looking at how we do things. So I don't know if you remember this thing, but Excel, why Microsoft's tool caused COVID-19 results to be lost? What happened here is that Public Health of England was dropping CSV files with coronavirus cases into an Excel spreadsheet, but they just happened to pick the wrong file format. They chose XLX instead of XLSX, which basically meant that they had roughly 65,000 rows of data available, and because of that, nearly 16,000 coronavirus cases went unreported. And a few months later, it came up to light that this specific problem was thought to have led to more than 1,500 COVID deaths in England. So it's not really surprising that nearly 1 in 5 of those that were surveyed in that study say that they went on to leave their companies as a result of those practices. And actually, I've done that. My first job, like actual first job straight out of university, was working in a company that was doing SMS promotion, this kind of thing. Send car to 333 and you can win a car, right? I worked on the team that was responsible to answer those SMSs, and the whole idea is just keep the users engaged so they can keep sending SMSs and they can keep spending money. Kind of works like this. You send car, they say, yeah, great, can you give us your name? And then you have more chances to win. Say, sure, I'm Marcos. Hey, Marcos, nice to meet you. Tell us where you live. And again, we'll give you some more points. Like, fine, I'm in Leeds. Like, okay, what about answering these 3 questions? And then you can get more points. And this goes on and on and on forever, and it never finishes, to the point that you will actually read the replies from people, just please fuck off and leave me alone. To which we will reply, that's the wrong answer, but what about this question? So I was earning a fair amount of money, and it's kind of like a privileged thing anyways, because I was just able to leave, move on to a different company, got way much less money, but I was just happier. So let's say that you work for Facebook. I don't know. You have people here that basically saying, hey, if you work for Facebook, just leave. What I will really say is that if you work for Facebook and you can afford that, and your whole situation basically can afford you to do that, I will leave. For me, the most interesting thing is that I really value a lot the values of the company that I work for, and if they're not aligned with myself, then it's when I will leave. But talking about Facebook, probably know about this. They exposed 87 million users to Cambridge Analytica, and I really wanted to pull this out of this whole move fast, break things, because I think this was very intentional. In fact, if you've read the papers that they were leaked, this was actually intentional, because guess what? They put profit behind users. And when your only North Star is making money through growth, which is their business model, I really doubt that anyone looked back at this whole thing and thought that this was an accident. They did the job, and they did it very, very well. And also, yesterday, Facebook announced, hey, we are now Meta, because whatever. And Zuckerberg actually said that now we have a new North Star, which I say bullshit, right? Nothing has changed, different name, same shenanigans, and that's really it. Until they actually, I'll read some of this. There's one that I actually like quite a lot. Renaming Facebook to Meta solves the same kinds of problems that renaming torture to enhance interrogations did. It's basically what they're doing right there. And something that we haven't even considered yet is how we are impacting the environment. I mean, surely there's no way that the code that we write can affect the environment, right? I mean, if you work for Volkswagen, it did at some point, but let's say that you don't work for any car company or anything like that. What about Bitcoin? Bitcoin now uses more electricity per transaction than a British household in 2 months. The amount of energy needed to run the cryptocurrency is now the same as the entire electrical consumption of Chile. In fact, Bitcoin mining now consumes more electricity than 159 countries, including Ireland and most countries in Africa. That is ethics done. Let's move on to privacy, which very close to my heart because it's what we do at DuckDuckGo, basically. So privacy is freedom. Right? Privacy treats people like people, not like data points, and puts them in control of their personal information. Unfortunately, we live in a surveillance economy where a few companies are amassing an unprecedented amounts of data, knowledge, and power with the goal of personalizing our experiences. In reality, it's just like to predict our click-through behavior so they can earn more money because, again, that is their business model. And contrary to what you might think, privacy is not for people who have something to hide, right? Privacy is for everyone. Studies show that when someone knows that they're being watched, they act differently. And that can be seen as a loss of self-expression. Simply put, surveillance may cause people to change their behavior and become conformist. And around privacy, I really want to tackle two very specific issues that directly affect all of you. The first one, probably heard about this, is the filter bubble, which simply put is the manipulation of your search results based on your personal data. In practice, what this means is that links are moved up or down or added to your search results or filtering out other search results. And everything, all these results that you actually see when you go on Google, they are the end result of the personal information that Google has on you. And that is browsing history, purchase history, and much, much more. And what that whole thing does is that puts you on a bubble based on what Google's algorithm thinks that you are most likely to click on. So let's say that you do one of these online quizzes to find out, hey, do you like more the country or the coast? I'm sure you've done plenty of this. Which Spice Girls are you? And turns out that you like more the countryside. But what you didn't know is that that website had an ads SDK integrated in it. And that SDK is now sending all your choices to a third-party company, which is effectively making your bubble smaller and smaller. Now you go onto the internet, and you see more countryside-related search results than you did before. I'm sure you have experienced this thing. Ads basically are just, in a very creepy way, following you all the time. This is particularly dangerous when it comes to political topics. And it really, in 2016, the filter bubble really, really helped Trump to win the elections. And the very annoying thing is that most of us didn't see it coming, pretty much like Brexit. And the thing is that the information that we take in is so personalized that we're blind to other perspectives. It also simultaneously explains why Trumpism has flourished and why so many of us are completely insulated from it. But this is not new. Back in 2011, the book, The Filter Bubble, What the Internet Hides from You, already proposed the thesis that although we think of the internet as an impartial and universally library, with Google serving as a superhuman organization system, it is remarkably and perhaps pathologically individualized. Back then, it was believed that Google used 57 signals to tailor its search results to us. In 2016, that number was over 200, and today we don't really know because they have removed that from the website, and the only thing that we know is that they use hundreds of different factors. And ultimately, democracy works only if we citizens are capable of thinking beyond our narrow self-interest. But to do so, we really need a shared view of the world that we cohabit. We need to come into contact with other people's lives, needs, and desires. And the filter bubble pushes us in the opposite direction. It creates the impression that our narrow self-interest is all that it exists. And while, this is great for getting people to shop online, it's not really great for getting people to make better decisions together. The second issue is discriminatory targeting. And boy, we have a lot of that here. So now that all your data is spread across different companies, now you're more likely to get specific ads tailored to you. And you might think that makes sense because, hey, you want a more personalized experience. But what you might not know is that that data can also be used against you. 2016, Facebook users sued over alleged racial discrimination in housing and job ads. 2016 as well, Facebook now lets advertisers exclude users by race. 2018, 2 years later, Facebook was sued by housing advocates because, again, they were letting landlords and real estate brokers to use their target advertising platform to discriminate against women, people with disabilities, and families with children. 2019, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, they charged Facebook with housing discrimination over companies' targeted advertising practices. And after at least 3 years, Facebook finally overhauled the whole ad targeting system to prevent discrimination in housing, credit, and employment, but not before settling 5 lawsuits and paying only around $5 million in legal fees and other costs, which is basically peanuts compared to the revenue of $15 billion in the first quarter of that same year. But they're not alone. Google also just announced that last year that they are adding new policies to restrict discriminatory targeting for housing ads. Literally a year after Facebook was sued over the same thing. Why did it take that long? Who knows? But maybe you don't care about housing. It's fine, I have news for you. Companies like Capital One, Enterprise Holdings, and many more also use Facebook targeting technology to advertise position only to men and younger workers. Women and workers over 55 years old never saw the promoted listings. And you might not be a woman, but you will probably eventually be older than 55. And what we see every day is just the internet being overrun by privacy abusers, creating this learned helplessness. People want privacy, but they feel powerless to do anything about it. According to Pew Research, 81% of Americans say that they have little to no control over the data that companies collect about them. 9 out of 10 Americans agree that privacy is a human right. So no, privacy is not just for people that have something to hide, it actually is for everyone. But fine, as a user, now you know, but what can you do as a developer? How is this your problem, really? Let me ask you a few questions here. Are you using the Facebook SDK in your apps? Are you using any ads SDK at all? Are you using Google Analytics in your personal website? Is your app tracking what the user does? Do you even know how those SDKs that you're using are communicating with third-party companies? Because again, let me remind you, the Facebook SDK was basically running hidden code even though the whole thing was disabled. And I'm sure the answer to some of those questions is probably, yeah, I'm doing some of that. And this is where you can really help. And I know it's not easy, right? Especially if you work at a big company, this is definitely not easy, but we kind of need to do something about this. First thing that you can do to help is advocate to eradicate privacy washing. Privacy washing, in a nutshell, are practices by companies which make the user accept a false level of privacy. So instead of being straightforward with them and then just saying that, hey, we're using your data in this way, we just hide that and behind dark patterns so users think that they're actually being protected, when in reality we're using the data in a different way. I work on this app. Do you know how many apps request location permissions so they can serve targeted ads? Do you know how many of them hide that behind this message that says, well, it creates a better experience for you? Rather than saying, what I'm actually doing is I'm taking your location and your personal data and sending that to a third-party company that we have no idea what they're going to do about. And according to the New York Times, at least 75 companies receive anonymous, precise location data from apps whose users enable location services to get local news or weather. By the way, speaking of privacy washing, did you know that incognito mode was actually never private? And in fact, there is a $5 billion with a B dollar lawsuit against Google for tracking behavior while on incognito mode. They actually tried to kill this lawsuit, but literally at the beginning of this year, a judge concluded that Google actually didn't notify users of data collection, and the lawsuit is moving forward. That is privacy washing. The second thing that you can do here is think about the data that you actually need and ask the right questions. I really love this tweet. If you're collecting personal data, how should I protect this is your third question. Should I collect this is only your second question. The first question is, what will the worst people do if they got hold of this? For example, Zoom, they were using the Facebook SDK to implement the login with Facebook functionality, and they found out that the SDK was collecting device information that was completely unnecessary. Likewise, other apps like Tinder, Grindr, and Pregnancy Plus, they had also been quietly sending sensitive user data to Facebook. That included religious affiliation, dating profiles, healthcare, and other type of data. And again, that wasn't those companies sending that data over to Facebook, it was the Facebook SDK collecting it. So let's ask that question. What will the worst people do if they got hold of this information? And the answer is not easy to digest. Police in Egypt are using dating apps to find and arrest LGBT people. This is something that's been going since 2017, at least, probably way more. If you search for this, there's like a lot of article news about this. So, we're causing this. We are integrating these SDKs. We are writing those SDKs. And we might not be aware of the consequences, but they are very, very real. It's privacy. Let's talk about our community now. And here, I really want to focus on empathy and integration. Roman Liserov, which I'm sure you know, said not long ago that the most important quality a software developer should have is being a good, caring, respectful person. To which some reply, Torvalds must be an exception. And this really made me think, right? Because when I think about Torvalds, I think, like Gordon Ramsay, all that kind of personalities that people love, and they just like very harsh. And a lot of people actually feed from these figures, and they think that tough love is great, right? It's a nice way to motivate people. You just yell at them, demise their opinions, ridiculize them on a daily basis, and maybe you can motivate some people by doing that, but I'm telling you, you're losing a lot of people along the way. So empathy is very, very important, not just as part of our community, but as a human being, really. And also, like, for the record, right? The fact that you're technically good doesn't mean that you have to be an asshole. And if you're one of those persons, that think that want to imitate Linus, being an asshole doesn't make you Linus, and being an asshole doesn't really make you any smarter. But we're not there yet. There's a whole lot of people that still think that empathy is not really important, and instead they would like avionics software to be written by harsh, selfish jerks, but highly skilled and responsible developers. Which is just an amazing sentence by itself, because it goes back to this 10x engineer kind of thing, rockstar developer, basically what we all know as programming. And being a selfish, harsh, and good developer might work in the short term when there isn't a team, and it's just that person working by himself, because it's definitely a he. And at some point, that team kind of like needs to grow up, right? And there are two scenarios here. You either hire more 10x engineers, which will eventually just work in silo, not communicate with each other because they're self-jerkies, right? And they wanna, they wanna be the rock stars, and if they have to microdose magic mushroom, then so be it. That's what I'm here for. And that culture already only allows that type of person in that company. The other option is that you hire junior engineers so they can do all the trivial problems that our rockstar, selfish jerk engineer cannot be bothered with, and leave him to just only worry about the real problems. Again, like he is the rock star, so if there is a deadline, he has to see through it and microdose magic mushrooms again, and I don't know, and that again like creates a culture that is going to see all those junior engineers just leave. But the 10x engineer could also leave, right? And because all that pressure might end up just having a price. And if your company has a boss factor of 1 being that 10x engineer, then you're screwed. And sure, but just in case, the boss factor is just how many developers have to be hit by a boss, so there is nobody left that understands how the code works anymore. And this is largely the culture that we have in software development. We're shifting away from it, let's be honest, but kind of like at a slowly pace. And this hurts, and especially hurts people that are getting into tech, especially minority groups. So, for example, whenever we write a job offer, we all have unconscious biases that influence how that job offer is going to be, it's going to look like. So if you are our 10x engineer, you might say things like, include your GitHub account. What if I don't have a GitHub account? What if I don't really want to do any work out of my actual work? What if I'm a single mother and I don't really have time for this? What if I actually don't have the means to do that because I cannot afford a computer or an internet connection at home? If you have an actual degree in computer science, and again, we saw that yesterday in the keynote, maybe you want someone from a top engineering school. What if you changed careers when you were 35? What if you just weren't born in the right country? Must speak good English. What if you're not confident with how you speak English? Maybe your accent is like mine, extremely thick, and then you know that I'm from Spain. Can we just change that to good communication skills? Recent college grad, change that to entry level, and then include everyone that is just starting in tech. By the way, this is gatekeeping. We keep you from getting into tech because you don't match a set of completely made up rules and superficial constraints that we just happen to have out of the box. Another example, imposter syndrome, which I think there are like a lot of different levels to this. It's very, very common in our community. I always have this when I join a new company, but for me it goes away very quickly. But for people that is just starting in tech, this is a bit more serious, right? And at that point is when you really need to be fully supported, not only by your team, but also by the whole community. Because otherwise, chances are that those people, they likely just leave the tech industry altogether. Because, you know, writing code is an extraordinary feeling when the code works. But, you know, when it doesn't, it could be pretty demoralizing. So much to the point that, you know, imposter syndrome kicks in, and then you're just wondering yourself, like, you know what, I'm not really good at this because I don't have a pet project. I don't have a degree from a top university. I haven't dedicated enough time out of my work to improve. I'm not smart enough. I'm not a real programmer. I shouldn't be here. And if you're the 10x engineer, then you will tell these people, yeah, you're bad, just leave. And this is rough. This is an actual picture when I was in university, 3 white males, obviously. What it says there is, would you let a computer science engineer pilot the plane taking you on vacation? I don't know why we're obsessed with planes, like in the tweet before. And then it says, don't let your apps be developed by anyone, demand professionalism. This was when I was in uni, literally finishing uni, 2008, 2007. And I kind of like used to think that, you know, only people like me with a computer and science degree should be allowed to write software. That was the culture back then, not that long ago. So much to the point that in Spain, we actually went to the streets. You know, computer science students from a lot of different universities, we went to the streets and claimed that our profession should be regulated and that people out of it should not be allowed to, among others, write software. And that is what I thought, and hopefully you don't think like that anymore. And obviously this whole hypothesis is basically wrong from the get-go. It's gatekeeping. It's us saying that, hey, unless you have the privilege, because it is a privilege of going to a university, then unless you have done that, you shouldn't be allowed to work as a developer. And obviously, I was there, I was stupid, I was wrong, and I was gatekeeping. And if you are a white male, you might not really see this, you might not understand it, but it is really there, and that is why empathy is so important. Because right now, our community looks like this, and it really needs to start looking a bit more like that. Because diversity and inclusion are directly connected to corporate performance. Gender equality benefits everyone. It stimulates economic growth and development, has a positive impact on the health and education of our community, and plays a part in creating strong institutions. And ultimately, we cannot simply be building apps and tools that that are supposed to work for everyone if we don't allow everyone to build those apps. So, we have talked about ethics, privacy, our community. You know, we have seen software all around us, pretty much every aspect of our lives. We have seen how the code that we write actually has a lot of different consequences, you know, environment, privacy, our users, and we finally had to look at how are we doing as a community. And I know there is a lot to digest here, but these are all real issues in our profession. So, now, you might not be interested in all this. You might be thinking, Marcos, this is all rubbish. You can go to hell. And if you're that person, I can just tell you, just reconsider. You know, investigate this by yourself. Get out of your filter bubble. Seek other people's opinions, please. If you do care, but you're still thinking, I'm just a developer, right? There's nothing that I can change here. So let's clear that up. What do we do then? Do we just sit back and wait for others to act? Don't think that has worked out very well so far, has it? And I mean, yes, you are a developer, but you're not only that, you actually have a voice. I mean, in fact, you have some power because you are the industry, right? You are writing the code. You can decide what you think is right and what you think is wrong, instead of just ignoring the consequences altogether. So, if you're interested and you want to fix this issue, welcome aboard. What can we do about this? First of all, companies need to do better here. They need to start implementing transparent processes for staff to raise ethical and moral concerns in a supportive environment. They also need to invest in training and resources that help workers understand and anticipate the social impact of their work. They have to acknowledge lack of diversity and change the language. Adjust search and candidate screening and make diversity training available. But we really need to push them towards that. We need to start questioning their practices. If you work for a big company, I know that the bigger picture might not look like your business, but it should be. And you have to take responsibility for the code that you write. And I'm going to throw this random idea here, but maybe we ought to have a Hippocratic oath. But you know, not like all these ethical manifestos bullshit that we all have, that we always had around, but rather as doubling down on responsible practice. Because don't forget this, no matter what happens, you actually wrote that code. We need to create a culture of inclusion and diversity where everybody is welcome, no matter the gender, race, or background. Ask the right questions. Is this new SDK necessary? Do we need to store this data? Be humble and civil to people. That's the bare minimum that you can do, really. Share your knowledge, don't create silos, and stop gatekeeping. If you have a pet project or a website, use tools with privacy-focused policy. For example, if you're using Google Analytics, change that and move to Fathom. And refuse to keep silent. And ultimately, you know, if none of that works and you can afford it, just leave. Leave and try to work for a company that is more aligned with your values. And I know this is very, very difficult and that you might be alone for a while, but that will change. And you really need to be courageous, first of all, for the people that cannot afford that, and second, for the people that don't have the courage to do it. Because maybe, I'm very naive about this, but maybe, just maybe, if those people, they see you, if they have the encouragement that they're not alone, they will join you. And you know, there is so much more than just writing code in our profession. We have code reviews, tests, ethics, privacy, diversity, community, and so much more. But we really need to start acting now, because this is not about coding anymore. Thank you.